The cold hit differently that morning. Not the kind of cold that bites at your cheeks and moves on, the kind that settles into your bones and stays there, the kind that makes the whole world go quiet. Ethan had been out since first light, camera in hand, working the tree line where the mountain dropped off into the valley below. 38 years old, 10 years shooting wildlife in some of the most remote corners of North America. He knew these mountains. He knew how animals moved through them. He knew what to expect. He did not expect this. She came through the snow like something was chasing her, waist-deep drifts, and she was moving fast, a blur of gray-brown fur barreling straight toward him. His first instinct was to back up. Pallas's cats don't do this. They don't approach humans. They don't approach anything. Of all the wild cats in the world, the Pallas's cat, the manual, is one of the most elusive, most reclusive animals alive. You could spend a decade in their territory and never once see one in the open, and yet here she was, charging at him. Her fur was matted with ice, her eyes were wide and wild, scanning him with an intensity that stopped him cold, and hanging from her mouth, a kitten, tiny, limp, barely visible against the white of the snow. Ethan didn't move, didn't breathe. She stopped about 10 feet away, set the kitten down in the snow, looked at Ethan, then looked back down at the kitten, then back at Ethan again. He would describe that look later as the thing that changed everything. Not the cold, not the kitten, that look. Like she was waiting for him to understand something. He'd photographed wolves, bears, mountain lions. He'd spent nights in blinds waiting for animals that never came. He understood, better than most, how wild things think, or rather, how they don't think the way we do. They don't calculate, they don't negotiate, they survive. But what this animal was doing had no clean explanation. She nudged the kitten with her nose, gently, once, twice, nothing. Ethan took one slow step forward. She didn't run. He took another. Her ears flattened, but her feet stayed planted. He crouched down in the snow, close enough now to see the kitten clearly. What he saw made his stomach drop. It was a male, maybe 3 weeks old, if that. His small body was barely the size of a grown man's fist. Ice crystals clung to his whiskers. His tiny paws, gray-padded, impossibly small, were stiff and cold to the touch. His breathing was so shallow Ethan had to watch for nearly 10 full seconds before he could confirm the chest was moving at all. The kitten was alive, but only just. Body temperature this low, in an animal this small, the window doesn't stay open long. Ethan pulled off his jacket without thinking, wrapped the kitten inside it, pressed him against his chest, stood up, started moving toward his truck, parked half a mile back along the ridge road. Moving fast, because fast was the only option left. And that's when he realized she was still there, not behind him, beside him, matching his pace through the snow, close enough that he could hear her breathing, short, fast, fogged in the freezing air. She wasn't following, she wasn't stalking. She was moving with him, like they were doing this together. He didn't look at her directly, didn't want to spook her, just kept moving, one foot in front of the other, the tiny body against his chest, the wild cat keeping pace 2 feet to his left. He thought about a lot of things in those minutes. What had happened to this kitten, how it had ended up alone in open snow, freezing, where the rest of the family was, because Pallas's cats don't typically have single kittens. There were more, there had to be more. But those questions would have to wait. The truck was cold. He got the heat running, held the kitten against the warm air from the vents, worked carefully to bring the temperature up slowly. Too fast could be just as dangerous as too slow. He had basic supplies in the back. Not a vet kit, but enough to try. The mother sat in the snow outside the truck, watching through the glass, not pacing, not vocalizing, just watching, with that same steady, unreadable focus she'd carried since the moment she first appeared. An animal that should have fled the second it heard a truck door open, and yet here she was. An hour passed, then another. Ethan talked quietly, mostly to the kitten, the way people do when they need to fill silence and don't know what else to offer. He talked about nothing, the snow outside, the stillness of the mountains, small things, and then, slowly, after nearly 3 hours, the kitten opened his eyes, pale, unfocused at first, blinking against the dim light inside the cab, but breathing steadier now, warmer, present. Ethan exhaled for what felt like the first time all day. He looked up, to the window, to where the mother had been sitting, to share the moment with the only other living thing that would understand what it meant. But the spot in the snow was empty. She was gone, just like that. No tracks leading away that he could follow, no sound, nothing. As if she had simply vanished into the mountain. He sat there a long moment, the kitten blinking quietly in his lap, the heater humming, the snow coming down heavier now outside. He didn't understand why she'd left. He didn't understand any of it. But somewhere, deep in the tree line, something was watching the truck. He just didn't know it yet. That first night Ethan didn't sleep much. He'd set up a small box near the wood stove, lined it with an old flannel shirt, tucked the kitten inside, checked on him every hour. The little body was warmer now, breathing steady. Every time Ethan leaned in close with a penlight, those pale eyes would crack open, catch the light, then slowly close again. Alive, still alive. He told himself that was enough for one day. But sometime around 2 in the morning, he heard something outside. Not wind, not the usual settling of the cabin walls in the cold. Something else, a presence. The way the mountain goes, just slightly more quiet when something is moving through it. He didn't go out. Just stood at the dark window and looked. Nothing visible, only snow and tree line and darkness. But in the morning, there they were, tracks, just outside the cabin wall, running the full length of the porch and disappearing back into the tree line. Small, precise, unmistakable. She hadn't gone far. He named the kitten Coda. He wasn't sure why. It just fit. Something about the way the little cat held himself even in those first fragile days, like there was a dignity in there somewhere waiting to come out. Ethan had photographed hundreds of animals over the years. He knew better than to name them. Naming things changes you, makes the distance harder to hold. He named him anyway. The first week was careful, slow work. Coda ate, reluctantly, and only on his own terms. Ethan quickly learned that offering food directly got him hissed at. Leaving it nearby and walking away got results. The kitten was weak, but he was wild, and wild meant proud, and proud meant you had to let him think every good thing was his own idea. By day 4, Coda was moving around the cabin. By day 6 he had claimed the space beneath the wood stove as his personal territory, and would hiss at Ethan's boots if they came within 6 inches of it. Ethan started documenting the tracks outside. Every morning, fresh ones. Always the same pattern. She'd circle the cabin, pause at certain points, then return to the tree line. He started leaving small amounts of food at the edge of the porch, not close enough to feel like a trap, just there, an offering maybe, or an acknowledgement. He never saw her take it. But it was always gone by morning. He called a wildlife biologist he knew, a woman named Dr. Reyes who'd spent 15 years studying small wild cats across Central Asia and the American ranges, described what had happened, the approach, the kitten, the behavior. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "That doesn't happen," she said. "Not with manuals, not with any wild cat I've studied at that level of human proximity." He told her about the tracks circling the cabin every night. Another pause. "She's not gone," Dr. Reyes said quietly. "She's monitoring." 3 weeks in, Coda knocked a coffee mug off the counter, watched it fall with great interest, then looked at Ethan as if daring him to say something about it. Ethan said nothing. He was starting to understand the rules. The kitten was eating better now. Raw protein, small portions, nothing processed. He'd drag pieces behind the wood stove and eat in private, which Ethan respected. He was hunting the pull toys Ethan had improvised from cord and crumpled paper with a focus that was slightly unnerving, not playful exactly, but intensely purposeful, like practice, like he was keeping something sharp. There was no affection, no purring, no slow approach looking for a hand to press against. But sometimes, in the evenings, Coda would come out from under the wood stove and sit at the far end of the room and simply be present, not close, not interacting, just there, in the same space, like he was deciding something. Ethan let him decide. Then came the morning everything changed. He almost missed it. He'd gone out early to check the tree line, habit by now, and the light was still thin and gray, the snow fresh and unmarked. He was turning back toward the cabin when he saw it, a dark stain in the snow. Small at first, then more, a trail of it, moving northeast along the base of the ridge, uneven and irregular in a way that animal tracks alone wouldn't explain. Blood, not a small amount. He stood there a moment, cold seeping through his boots, looking at the trail leading away into the trees. Every reasonable instinct said to go back inside, call Dr. Reyes, let it be. He followed it instead. The forest was heavy that morning, snow loaded on the branches overhead, dropping in sudden soft crashes when the wind shifted. He followed the trail for nearly 40 minutes, losing it twice in areas where the wind had disturbed the snow, picking it up again further on, and then the trees opened up, a shallow depression in the hillside, natural shelter, partially covered by a fallen spruce. And there, half hidden in the darkness beneath the branches, she was lying on her side. Her breathing was visible from 10 feet away, labored, uneven. Her left rear leg was extended at an angle that wasn't right, a wound along her flank, partially frozen over, dark against her fur. She heard him coming and lifted her head, her eyes fixed on him immediately, that same direct, unreadable focus from the first morning. Her ears went flat, a low sound in her throat. Warning. He stopped, held still, let her look at him, but that wasn't all he saw. Behind her, tucked deep into the shelter of the fallen tree, barely visible in the shadows, movement, small, multiple, kittens, not one, not two, 5 of them, huddled together, eyes wide, silent, watching him with the same flat-eared weariness as their mother. Ethan stood in the snow and felt the full weight of it settle over him. She hadn't come to him that morning with one kitten because Coda was the only one she had. She'd come because he was the one she could carry, because the others were here, hidden, waiting for her to come back. Because she had been trying, in the only way available to her, to save all of them. And in doing that, in crossing every instinct she had to approach a human in open ground, she had gotten hurt. He called Dr. Reyes from the tree line, voice low. She asked him to describe the wound, the leg, the breathing. She asked about the kittens, their size, their condition, whether they were moving. She needs help, Dr. Reyes said, but she won't let you near her, not for treatment, not for food, not if she doesn't have a reason to trust you yet. Ethan looked at the mother. She was watching him still, ears still flat, body tense despite the pain she was clearly in. He thought about Coda, back at the cabin, under the wood stove, eating in private, hissing at Boots, carefully, quietly surviving. He thought about what Dr. Reyes had just said. A reason to trust you. He got back to the cabin in under 20 minutes, picked up Coda, who voiced a strong opinion about this, wrapped him carefully, and headed back into the trees. When he came through the clearing a second time, the mother raised her head again, same posture, same warning sound. Then she saw the kitten in his arms, and everything changed. The sound stopped, the ears came forward. She lifted herself, slowly, painfully, and stretched her neck toward Coda, nose working the air. Coda, for his part, went completely still in a way Ethan had never seen him do before. Not tense, just still, like something in him recognized what he was being brought back to. The mother settled back down. The tension in her body shifted into something quieter. She looked at Ethan once more, then looked away, like a door, quietly opening. That night, Ethan set up a remote camera at the den site and went back to the cabin. He sat at the table with cold coffee and tried to process the scale of what he'd found. 6 kittens total, a mother injured and alone, miles from the nearest town. Winter deepening by the day. He pulled up the camera feed on his laptop just before midnight. The mother was resting. The 5 kittens were piled close around her. Coda was back under the wood stove. He was watching the feed, thinking about next steps, supplies, Dr. Reyes, what kind of shelter he could add to the site without disturbing them. When the camera caught movement at the edge of the frame, he leaned forward. 3 shapes in the tree line, large, moving low through the snow with that particular fluid patience that meant only one thing: wolves. Not passing through, watching the den. The storm came in from the northwest without much warning. 1 hour the sky was flat and gray and still. The next, the wind was moving through the tree line like something alive, bending the spruce tops hard to the east, driving snow horizontal across the open ground. Temperature dropped 12 degrees in under 2 hours. Ethan had seen bad winters up here. This one meant business. He was already pulling on his gear before he fully knew what he was going to do. He'd spent the previous day working carefully, slowly, around the den site, not close, never close enough to crowd her, but close enough to matter. He'd wedged a section of weatherproof canvas between 2 spruce trunks, upwind of the fallen tree, creating a secondary barrier against the worst of the wind, left it there and walked away. Came back the next morning to find her watching him from inside the den, the kittens a warm pile behind her, none of them panicked. She was learning his patterns, he was learning hers. Dr. Reyes had driven out 2 days after his call, a 4-hour trip on mountain roads she'd made without hesitation. She'd assessed the mother from a distance, binoculars, careful observation. The leg wasn't broken. A deep laceration along the flank, likely from a territorial encounter with another predator earlier in the season. Painful, limiting, but survivable, given rest and no additional stress. The problem, Dr. Reyes said, standing beside Ethan in the tree line, breath clouding in the cold air, is that she's not going to rest, not with kittens that age, not with wolves in the area. What do we do? Dr. Reyes was quiet for a moment. We make it easier for her to do what she's already doing, she said. That's all we can do. The wolves had been back twice since that first night on the camera feed, not attacking, not yet. But the pattern was familiar to anyone who understood how predators work in winter. They were mapping the territory, logging the resources, weighing the effort against the return. A mother cat weakened by injury, 6 young kittens, minimal defensive options. The math wasn't good. Ethan started keeping the remote camera feed open on his laptop through the nights. He'd wake at 2, 3 in the morning and check it without really deciding to, the way you check on something when the worry has moved too deep to stay on the surface. Most nights, nothing. The family, resting. The kittens growing, visibly, almost daily. The mother sometimes moving to the edge of the den and sitting in the cold, scanning the tree line in the dark, ears rotating slowly like small radars. She never fully relaxed. He understood why. By the 4th day of the storm's buildup, the temperature had dropped far enough that Ethan was genuinely worried about the kittens. Pallas's cats are cold-adapted. Their fur is the densest of any wild cat species, thick, long, built for exactly this kind of mountain winter. But the kittens were still young enough that the margin was thinner than he liked, and the mother, still compromised from her injury, was burning reserves she couldn't fully replace. He left food at the den's edge that morning. Raw protein, the same type he'd been leaving. Came back in the afternoon to find it untouched. Came back at dusk, still there. She wasn't eating. He stood in the gathering dark and thought about what that meant. An animal burning energy to keep 6 kittens warm, fighting off the effects of an unhealed wound, monitoring a wolf pack moving through her territory, and not eating. He left twice the amount the following morning. Went back to the cabin, watched the camera. By midday she'd eaten, all of it. Then settled back over the kittens like a living blanket, their small bodies tucked beneath her, invisible from outside. He exhaled slowly. Small victories, you learned to take them. Coda, meanwhile, had made a decision. Ethan noticed it 3 days into the storm preparation. The kitten had stopped sleeping under the wood stove. He'd find him instead at the window that faced northeast, toward the ridge, sitting with the particular stillness wild cats use when they're paying attention to something beyond what's visible, facing the direction of the den. Ethan didn't know what to make of it. Whether Coda sensed something through instinct, through scent carried on the wind, through some channel that didn't have a human name. He only knew that the kitten sat at that window for hours at a time, and that something in his posture had changed, less guarded, somehow, than the small fierce privacy he'd maintained since the first day, like he was listening for something, like he was waiting. The worst night came on a Tuesday. The storm had been building for 36 hours by then, wind steady at 30 miles an hour with gusts that rattled the cabin walls and sent loose snow in long white sheets across the open ground, visibility near zero past the tree line. Temperature at the kind of number that made the air feel thin. Ethan was watching the camera feed at 11:30 when the motion sensor triggered on the second camera, the one he'd positioned further out along the ridge, covering the wider approach. 3 shapes, then 4, then 6, moving through the trees with that low, fluid patience, closer than they'd come before, much closer. He was already on his feet. He called the wildlife ranger station before he left the cabin. Got through on the 3rd try, voice steady, information clear, location, situation, the wolf pack, the injured mother, the ranger on duty, a man named Cole who'd worked this range for 20 years, listened without interrupting. "I'm 40 minutes out," Cole said. "Stay back from the pack. Don't put yourself between them and the cats." Understood. He went anyway. He heard them before he saw them. Low vocalizations moving through the trees, not howling, not the dramatic soundtrack of wolves in films. Something quieter, more purposeful. The sound of animals communicating in the dark, coordinating without urgency because they didn't feel they needed it. He came through the tree line with his flashlight and a flare, the kind you carry in mountain survival kits and hope you never use. Stopped at the edge of the clearing. The wolves were at the far side, 4 of them visible, 2 more shapes moving in the periphery, large, winter lean. Their eyes caught the flashlight and held it. and between them and the den, she was standing. Injured leg, compromised flank, 2 months of a brutal winter already behind her, and she was standing at the entrance to that fallen spruce, completely still, completely silent, not retreating, not vocalizing, just there, a wall of 5 pounds of Pallas's cat between 6 wolves and her children. Ethan's throat tightened. He fired the flare into the sky above the pack. The light burst red-orange over the clearing, turning the snow the color of something warm and impossible. The wolves scattered back, not far, not panicked, but back. He moved forward, positioning himself in the open ground between the pack and the den, flashlight sweeping the tree line, making himself large and visible and present. The mother didn't move from the entrance, but her ears swiveled toward him, 1 beat, 2, then back to the tree line. They held the ground together, the man and the small wild cat, while the snow came down around them and the red light faded back to darkness overhead. Cole arrived 38 minutes after the call. 2 rangers, headlights cutting through the storm, engine noise rolling through the trees in a way that meant business. The wolves were gone before the truck stopped moving, not eliminated, not resolved, just pushed back into the deeper dark where they'd wait and recalculate. Cole stood beside Ethan in the clearing and looked at the den. The mother had retreated inside. The kittens were silent. The snow around the entrance was pressed flat from her vigil. She held them off, Ethan said. It came out quieter than he intended. Cole looked at the tracks in the snow. The wolf impressions, the cat's small precise prints at the entrance. Yeah, he said, she did. The rangers set up 2 motion sensor deterrents along the main approach corridors, high-frequency emitters that wouldn't harm anything but would discourage the pack from treating the area as easy ground. Temporary solution, but winter wouldn't last forever. They were gone by 2 in the morning. Ethan stood alone in the clearing for a while after, listening to the storm moving through the trees overhead, the flare casing half buried in the snow at his feet, the camera light blinking steady red at the edge of the frame. He checked the feed. The mother was nursing. The kittens, all 5 of them, pressed in close, their small sides rising and falling. Her eyes were open, watching the entrance, but her body had finally found the stillness that passed for rest. Alive, all of them, still alive. He was about to close the feed and head back to the cabin when the motion on the screen shifted. She stood, moved to the entrance of the den, looked out, then she walked forward, not far, 4 or 5 steps into the open, and stopped. She stood in the snow for a long moment, looking in the direction he'd gone. Then she did something he had never seen her do before. She walked toward the camera, close enough that the frame filled with her face, those flat, wide-set eyes, the frost on her whiskers, the particular depth of a wild thing looking directly at something and choosing in that moment not to look away. She held it for 3 seconds, then turned, walked back to her kittens, settled over them. The den went quiet. Ethan sat with the laptop in the cold cabin for a long time after that, Coda at the window behind him, the storm outside beginning, very slowly to ease. He thought about what Dr. Reyes had said, make it easier for her to do what she's already doing. He thought about the night she'd first appeared, charging through the snow, kitten in her mouth, eyes wild with something that wasn't aggression. He understood it now, he thought. It hadn't been wildness, it had been a question. And somehow, without fully knowing how, he had answered it correctly. Spring was coming. He could feel it in the way the light had started to shift, arriving a few minutes earlier each morning, hanging a few minutes later in the evening. The mountain was still cold, still deep and white. But underneath all of it, something was loosening. The kittens were getting bigger now. He could see them on the camera feed, venturing further from the den each day, pouncing at shadows, wrestling each other with clumsy intensity, exploring the world in the cautious, fearless way of young things that don't yet know what they should be afraid of. The mother watched all of it with steady, patient eyes, and sometimes, in the evenings, she would pause at the edge of the clearing and look toward the cabin, not asking for anything, just looking. Ethan started to understand, somewhere in those quiet weeks, that something was coming to an end, and that whatever it was, it had been worth every cold and sleepless night of it. Spring came to the mountain the way it always does up here, not all at once, not dramatically, just gradually, stubbornly, the way real things change. A week of mornings where the cold still bit hard but the light had something different in it. Then a week where the snow along the south-facing ridge started pulling back from the rocks, exposing dark earth for the first time in months. Then one afternoon Ethan stepped outside, and realized he hadn't thought about the temperature in hours. That was how he knew. The kittens were unrecognizable from the fragile, huddled shapes he'd first seen in the shadows of that fallen spruce. They were lean now, quick, moving through the clearing around the den with a fluid confidence that hadn't been there a month ago. He'd watched them on the camera feed in the mornings, 5 of them spilling out into the early light, scattering in different directions, each one following some private instinct toward movement and sound and the particular education of the world. The mother watched from the entrance. She was healed. The limp he'd tracked through the worst weeks of winter was gone, or nearly gone, a slight favoring of that left rear leg on cold mornings that Dr. Reyes said might stay with her permanently, like an old scar carried quietly forward. But she moved well. She hunted. She was present in the full sense of the word. Ethan found himself documenting less with the camera and simply watching more. Coda had changed too. The fierce private creature who'd claimed the space beneath the wood stove and hissed at Boots was still in there, still fundamentally himself, still wild in all the ways that mattered. But something had loosened in the weeks since the worst of winter had passed. He spent less time at the window, more time simply present in the cabin, moving through it with an easy, proprietorial air, as if he'd decided the space was acceptable and the human in it was tolerable. He never sought contact, never asked for it. But sometimes in the evenings he would come and sit at the far end of the couch, not close, always that careful distance, and simply occupy the same room, the same light, the same quiet. Ethan had learned not to make anything of it, just let it be what it was. That was enough. The first sign came on a morning in late April. He went to check the den site, and found it quieter than usual. The kittens weren't in the clearing, the mother wasn't at the entrance. He checked the camera feed. Nothing for several hours the previous evening, then a brief flicker of movement heading northeast along the ridge. He told himself it was a hunting run, normal ranging behavior. The family expanding their territory as the season opened up and prey became more available. He came back the next morning, still quiet, and the morning after that. He didn't let himself name what was happening for almost a week. Just kept checking the feed, kept leaving food at the old spot out of habit, kept telling himself the stillness was temporary. Then one evening he sat down with the camera footage and went back through it carefully, not looking for dramatic moments, just tracking the pattern. And what the pattern showed him was this. Over the past 3 weeks, the family's activity around the den had been decreasing steadily, not suddenly, not all at once, but consistently, like a tide pulling back from a shore. They were ranging further, returning less. The mountain was calling them back into itself. He closed the laptop and sat with that for a long time. Coda was at the window, facing northeast, still in that particular way of his. Ethan didn't say anything. What was there to say? He saw them one last time in May. He'd gone out early, camera out of habit more than purpose, working the tree line in the low golden light that comes just after sunrise when the mountain is at its quietest. He wasn't thinking about much, just walking, just being in the place he'd spent the most important winter of his life. He came around a bend in the ridge trail and stopped. They were in the clearing below, all 6 of them, the mother sitting at the center, the 5 kittens arranged loosely around her, some sitting, one stretched long in a patch of early sunlight that had broken through the spruce canopy. And at the edge of the group, slightly apart, sitting with that particular uprightness, Coda, back with them, among them, belonging to them in a way that had always been true, even through the months in the cabin, even through the wood stove and the hissing and the careful, maintained distance. It had always been temporary. He had always known, somewhere below the knowing, that this was how it ended. The mother looked up, found him immediately, the way she always had, the way he suspected she always would, that direct, steady gaze, ears forward, no alarm, no tension, just recognition. He stood still in the trail and looked back at her. A minute passed, maybe more. Then she stood, unhurried, looked once at the kittens, and moved into the trees. One by one they followed, the 5, then Coda, pausing at the tree line for one moment and looking back at Ethan with those pale eyes before disappearing into the shadows after his mother. Gone. The clearing was empty. The sunlight sat in it undisturbed. Summer came and went. Ethan worked. Shot other assignments, other mountains, other animals, filed the photographs from the winter, the ones he'd taken in the early days, before everything became too personal for the camera to feel right. They were good photographs, clean, honest, technically precise. They didn't come close to capturing anything that had actually happened. He sent Dr. Reyes the best ones. She sent back a long message full of careful scientific language about behavioral anomalies and proximity tolerance and what the winter had added to the existing body of knowledge on Pallas's cat interaction with humans. At the very end of the message, she'd added one line outside of all the careful language. "You were trusted," she wrote. "That doesn't happen. Take care of that." He read it twice, then set his phone down and went outside and stood on the porch for a while in the summer evening, listening to the mountain. Fall arrived, then the first cold, then the first snow. The cabin felt different that winter, not empty exactly, but quieter in the specific way of a place where something significant had happened and was now simply part of the walls. He'd find himself at the wood stove in the evenings and think about Coda sitting beneath it, eyes catching the firelight, hissing at nothing, fiercely private and quietly present. He wondered where they were. Whether the kittens had scattered to their own territories now. That's how it goes with wild cats, each one eventually claiming its own ground. Whether the mother was managing her winter well, whether that leg still bothered her in the cold. He wondered about Coda especially. He didn't let himself wonder too long. That was the deal you made when you let wild things be wild. You gave them back to the mountain, and you didn't spend too much time looking toward the tree line. Most nights he managed it. The night it happened was mid-December. Snow had been falling since afternoon, steady, dense, the kind that silences everything and makes the world feel very small and very still. Ethan had been reading, fire going, the cabin warm against the cold pressing at the windows. Nearly midnight. He heard it, not at the door. Not the sound of an animal outside in the way you'd usually hear it. Movement, disturbed snow, the creak of a step on the porch. At the window, a sound against the glass, small, deliberate, repeated. He set down his book, crossed to the window, looked out. She was sitting in the snow directly outside, close enough that her breath was fogging faintly against the lower edge of the glass, healthy, solid, her winter coat full and dense, the way it had never quite been during those hardest months. Her eyes caught the interior light and held it, that same steady, direct look he'd carried in his memory through every month since May. He stood at the glass and looked at her. She looked back, and then his eyes adjusted fully to the dark beyond her, and he saw them. Ranged in a loose arc behind her in the falling snow. 6 shapes, grown now, substantial, each one carrying that unmistakable Pallas's cat stillness. 5 from the den, and one slightly to the left, sitting with a particular uprightness, pale eyes catching the light from the window. Coda. Ethan didn't go outside. He understood, somehow, that going outside wasn't the point. The point was the window. The point was this exact image, the family in the snow, the light from the cabin falling across them, the mother sitting closest with her breath fogging against the glass. Not asking for anything, not hungry, not injured, not in need of anything he could provide. Just there. He stood at the window for a long time, long enough that the cold radiating through the glass reached him even through his shirt. Long enough that the snow had started to settle lightly on the mother's back. She didn't move. He thought about that first morning, the waist-deep snow, and the ice-covered fur, and the tiny limp body in her mouth. The wildness in her eyes that he'd initially misread as aggression and had spent an entire winter understanding more clearly. It hadn't been aggression. It had been the absolute, undiluted desperation of a mother who had run out of options and was placing her last bet on the one thing available to her, the judgment of a stranger. She had looked at him in that freezing open ground and decided, for reasons he would never fully understand, that he was worth trusting. And she had come back now, 1 year later, family intact, all 6 of them healthy and strong and whole, not because she needed anything, but because she remembered. The mother held his gaze for one more long moment. Then she turned her head, looked back at the family behind her. Some signal passed between them that had no sound and needed none. One by one they rose, the 5, then Coda, then finally the mother herself, and moved into the falling snow. Ethan watched until the last shape had dissolved into the white and the dark and the quiet mountain beyond. The clearing was empty again. The snow continued falling, steady and indifferent, already beginning to soften the edges of the prints they'd left behind. He stood at the window a long time after they'd gone. He thought about what Dr. Reyes had said. You were trusted. That doesn't happen. Take care of that. He thought about a desperate mother charging through waist-deep snow with a dying kitten in her mouth, placing every instinct she had on hold long enough to ask a stranger for help. He thought about Coda under the wood stove, about flannel shirts and cold coffee and camera feeds watched at 2 in the morning, about a red flare opening over a dark clearing and 2 sets of eyes holding the tree line together. He thought about how you go into a winter thinking you understand what's important and come out the other side knowing the list was longer than you thought. That winter I thought I saved a freezing kitten. Months of cold and fear and sleepless nights, and I told myself the story the way it's easy to tell it, that I was the one who showed up, that I was the one who helped. But standing at that window in the December snow, watching them disappear back into the mountain they'd always belonged to, I understood something different. A mother in the worst moment of her life had looked at a stranger and decided he was worth the risk. She had trusted me before I'd done a single thing to earn it. Everything that came after, every hard night, every small victory, every moment I almost gave up and didn't, was just me trying to be worth what she'd already decided I was. I hope I got close.